Hi, welcome to this week's edition of More Insights and Strategy Game Time Tech. I'm Melody Brue, and I'm joined by my co-host Robert Kramer. On this show, we talk about how major technology companies integrate with sports franchises to improve operations, fan engagement, and athlete performance, and more. So, Robert, you were recently in Seattle for an AWS event, and you got a behind-the-scenes look at Amazon's relationship with the Seahawks and Lumen Field. That must have been super fun.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I had a little FOMO, I have to admit. And you have a guest today who's going to give us a broader overview of AWS's work with both the NFL as well as other leagues. Who do you have for us today?
What a great episode we have here. We have a special guest, like you said, from AWS. It's Julie Souza. She's the global sports strategist. And we're going to look at what the relationship is with the NFL. I know we all love watching football, and behind the scenes, there's so much going on that AWS is involved in with their technology. So meeting Julie at the game, we were able to talk about a lot of things that they're doing. So let's bring Julie on and let's say hi and get some down to business and ask her some questions.
Awesome.
Hi, Julie.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Julie. Welcome. Thanks for being on with us.
It's so exciting to watch football, and I know that you have a pretty extensive past with just sports and working for different firms, and AWS is probably ecstatic to have you as the global sports strategy lead. And when you look into AWS sports and what they're involved in, what type of themes and trends do you see going around from an innovation perspective?
Great question, because there certainly are these themes or sort of these coalesced areas where we see sports properties leaning in to drive innovation and leverage technology to improve their businesses, right? So one of those three big buckets, the first one is around the performance data and analytics that we're collecting out of sports now. And Rob, I think Robert, you and I maybe talked about this in Seattle, which is when we were growing up, sports fans, the raw data of sports was a box score, and you could look at that and it made sense, right? Now the raw data of sports is degrees of latitude and longitude. It's tracking data, right? It's X's and Y's and sometimes Z's on the field of play, and it's coming in at such copious volumes. An average Bundesliga soccer match is emitting about 3.6 million points of data per match. Next gen stats that fuel in the NFL, right? The data that fuels that's 300 million points of data per season. And all of that pales in comparison to the Formula One, where we're collecting 1.1 million points of data per second off of the cars,
Wow.
right? So just tremendous volumes of data, and making sense of that is, that's not a human job. That is machine learning and artificial intelligence and CV and all of that. So I think there's a lot of use cases.
Data, not to interrupt, but sorry I interrupted, but Amazon is correlating that data. So the quality of it is at a pretty high level that the teams or the different leagues or Formula One, they don't necessarily have to worry about the data quality because it's being aggregated and put forth by AWS for everybody. Is that correct? Or is there a different way that it's being done per team?
So the data is being collected through a variety, and it's not not the same way for every single sport. So take the NBA, for example. They collect data through optical tracking through cameras, right? And so they're taking that input data, and then the machination is certainly the application of AI and ML and computer vision. National Hockey League, National Football League, to fuel their statistics, like their next gen stats or NHL Edge IQ, that is coming from sensor-based tracking in the uniforms. And in some cases, to fuel player health and safety use cases at the NFL, it's the convergence of both optical tracking and sensor-based tracking. So marrying that data, truing it up, certainly is something that's really critical to making sure that it's clean data that you're working on, so that you could build these models against it to be able to understand, hey, is this a predictive analytic that helps us and the fans identify a potential blitzer? Or hey, is this data that helps us understand a particular play in the game of football has a disproportionately high injury rate vis-a-vis other plays? And so that's the exciting thing too, is that these games are being changed in response to the data to make them safer for the players. And we can talk about some of that a little bit later if you want. But that's, one of those big pillars, and it's like never ending use cases for the data in that performance data and analytic pillar. And then just very briefly, the other two big buckets are around media management, live cloud production, and distribution of content, of live games. And so we're seeing some really exciting things there. NHL's helped leading the way on some of that innovation. And then fan data and analytics. Right? How do we understand our fans better so that we can serve them better? We can market to them more efficiently. We can do ultra personalization, hyper personalization to let them feel seen and valued by the sports properties. So those are the big themes that we're seeing. And we're just really fortunate to work with partners that want to lean in and sort of push the envelope and let us help, push them a little bit too. So it's really exciting.
That's great.
That's great. You mentioned kind of some of the player health and safety stuff. I think this stuff it's so important. My kids played, well, they play sports now, but they play baseball, and I think it's safer than football. But I love seeing the advances in safety for players, and ultimately that benefits, I think, everybody, the fans, the franchises. I mean, companies are making massive investments in these athletes, and so investing in things that protect their performance, protect their health is so important. So how are you working with these franchises to protect their investments, their players?
That's absolutely the way of looking at it, right? It's everybody wants the players to be safe. The owners are spending a lot of money to bring these players onto the roster. The players want to be safe. They don't want to be on the sidelines. They want to be out there playing the game they love. Fans want their favorite players. Everybody in the ecosystem wants and needs players performing at their optimum level, right? So football, and I agree, baseball a little less dangerous than a high contact
injuries.
yes. And I mean, all of my kids play ice hockey, which is terrifying. But watching football and that being a very high contact sport, it really was, the league has to address that, has to be tracking it. How do we protect our players? So part of it is first the data collection that we talked about, both that optical and the sensor-based tracking, and then creating these models to understand, right? I talked about higher risk plays, higher risk of injury plays. There was a play called the hip drop tackle, and that's when you sort of grab a player around his waist and sort of fall on his legs to tackle him, from behind. Mm-hmm. They found out that caused 20x the injury rate vis-a-vis an ordinary play, right? This season, that's outlawed. You can't do a hip drop tackle anymore without getting fined and penalized for it. Similarly, the dynamic kickoff rule changed this year. Robert, we saw that, right? The kickoff rule looked very different at the Seahawks game. The previous incarnation had a 4x injury concussion rate, right? And a 2x injury rate. So how do we start using this data to simulate changes in our game? So they use 10,000 seasons worth of data to simulate how they could change that rule in that play to make it less injurious, but also still exciting, or maybe even more exciting, some folks would argue, right? And then they have this digital athlete product too, which is this portal, which last season was made available to all 32 clubs. And it was aggregating all of this data to give the training staff, coaching staff, medic staff, all of them this access to data to understand, hey, which players are potentially at risk of injury? And how do we get to them before injury is sustained? There were 700 fewer missed games last season in the NFL. And I think it's because you got to be able to say, hey, these guys are showing up on my dashboard as potentially at risk. How do we deal with load management and switching up their training regimen and whatnot to be able to ameliorate a potential injury from occurring? So really exciting stuff that they're doing there. And to your point about the trickle down impact, 100%. The investments that the league is making trickles down to like the, college and amateur level. There are 8 different position-specific helmets in the NFL now. It used to be a one-size-fits-all, right? But now they realize, hey, how an offensive lineman absorbs a hit very differently from a cornerback or something else. And so let's actually change our equipment to be more specific and safe. And all of that trickles down throughout the amateur market and whatnot. So that's, everybody benefits from those investments at the league level.
That's really great. That's really, I think, such a neat thing when you can see that something that, maybe it affects some big athlete here and then anybody can have it, like kids playing Pop Warner, like these investments actually really end up being like pretty significant. Um, One thing, I think the way that cloud technology has helped to propel some of these things, and particularly broadcasting, um, the way the angles, the number of cameras, the speed, all of the things that really actually make the fan experience so much better. Let's talk about some of the things that AWS is doing with broadcast technology to improve that for the fans. And also, I guess, I mean, talk about trickle down effect. It's got to be easier for the the broadcast companies, right?
Sure. And I'd love to shine light on the NHL here because I think they've been a real leader in the industry in terms of adopting and experimenting with live cloud production. So if you've ever been to a game, and we saw the trucks there, Robert, right? The big OB trucks that are sitting in the parking lot.
Yeah.
That's a terrestrially taxing thing, right? You've got these big trucks, you've got generators, you're schlepping equipment, you're sending people. You don't need to do all of that on premise. You can move these production workloads to the cloud, and that's what the NHL started experimenting with about a year, almost 2 years ago now, and started taking all those camera feeds, sending the signals into an encoding rack, and then sending everything up to the cloud. And they produced, as a sort of proof of concept for themselves, a game that was produced entirely in the cloud. So the people that were operating that game, it was in Seattle. It was a Seattle Kraken game. And I, the screen looked very much like what I'm looking at with all of us right now. The technical director was in Madison, Wisconsin. Replay 1 was in Vancouver. Replay 2 was in Toronto. None of the people producing that game at the same high quality, no latency, with all the graphics and replay capabilities, none of them were in the building, right? And so we actually, anecdotally, we spoke to the technical director afterwards, and we said, what was the real difference for you? Producing the game, in the cloud versus in a truck. And he said, well, the difference was 20 minutes before the game, I was having dinner with my family. 20 minutes after, I was in my own bed, right? So there was like no technical change. It was just, I didn't have to travel, right? I didn't have to be. So, and I think that when I look at the value there, I think you're going to see time savings in the setup and the breakdown, cost savings at scale for sure. The diversity of talent you can attract, because you're not beholden to who can be in a truck in Seattle on Thursday, right? I think you can keep more women in the production game. I think that's part of that. Sustainability. The NHL, when they did this test, they've done subsequent tests that all culminated this past March. They were the first league in North America to produce and distribute a game entirely in the cloud. And when they did that, it was a live game, right? Live to air. They did not emit 2.05 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And to counteract 2.05 tons of carbon dioxide, you'd have to plant 34 trees and grow them for 10 years. So there's, at scale, a real positive impact we can have from a sustainability and a carbon footprint standpoint as an industry. And the last big benefit for live cloud production, I will say, is just the flexibility it gives you to be able to experiment with alternate broadcasts and different ways of displaying and distributing your content. When they did that live cloud production, because everything was in the cloud, they also produced a data-rich broadcast. It was for the people who wanted to go really wonky into the analytics of the sport, right? And that might appeal to a one demographic, but you've also seen the NHL and the NFL experiment with, again, taking that data we were talking about for that tracking data and marrying it with other IP, like Big City Greens version of the NHL or the Toy Story version of the NFL, right? And all of a sudden, you're taking this tracking data, you're marrying it up with the content or the video content, and you're saying, hey, you can watch this game as the players are playing it, but instead of the players, you're seeing cricket from Big City Greens, skate around the ice. And what's very interesting is when the NHL did that, it completely flipped their demo. They went from primarily male to primarily female. Average age dropped 20 years, and the sweet spot was tween girls, which
Wow.
awesome. Tween girls are now
Fantastic.
it's like the Taylor Swift effect or something. Maybe not quite as much, but it's bringing new fans into the game in a really creative way. So that's really exciting to see too.
So, Julie, you've given us so much to take in here in terms of player injuries, sustainability, all the things. What is the thing that you feel like the big takeaway from this has to be for people?
Yes, I think that the sustainability of the cloud is a really compelling reason to be using the cloud, right? You're optimized in the cloud in a way that you are not on-prem or with physical data centers. One aspect of this where I see real impact and benefit coming from the use of cloud is around live cloud production, though, because you're not sitting there with a very heavy terrestrial truck and equipment and people being shipped, moving all across the world. We're seeing European Football League, for example, in Europe. It's American football in Europe, and they are leveraging live cloud production to produce most of their content. And last season, they did not emit 332 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is substantial, right? That's a substantial reduction in footprint. If they had been producing in a regular OB truck sort of way, a terrestrial way, that would have been much more corrosive to our environment. And I think you're starting to see governments, advertisers, sponsors step up and demand better, right? What are your efforts to bring down emissions, to be sustainable in your efforts? I think live cloud production, just as a starting point in our industry, is one that everybody should be focused on.
Julie, we had a great time at the Seattle game and great chance to catch up and go over a lot of things specifically about the NFL, a lot of tools that they're using. But as we talk about other sports and we get into Gen AI, what sports are using it in-depthly besides the NFL, and some use cases that you might bring up? But also, do you think it's a positive or negative from a technology perspective, how it affects the game from a nostalgic perspective?
I mean, I think it depends on so generative AI is a tool, right? And so the application of that tool needs to be done responsibly and in furtherance of business objectives. Tech for tech's sake isn't as interesting to me as something that actually drives business value for our customers and our industry. So with that caveat, and to answer your question about who's doing what that's interesting, Bundesliga, or the Deutsche Football League, DFL, they're doing a lot of experimentation and actually have some production use cases of generative AI that really are compelling in terms of driving operational efficiency in one instance. So they may have an article or whatnot that they'll produce and then use generative AI to say, okay, take this article or take this piece of content and cut it down for all different platforms or lengths or demographics, right? And it's all being done dynamically, and you're not having people recreate versions of the same content. It's done for you, very efficiently. Also, I think in the globalization effort, all sports are looking to globalize their sports, as evidenced by, right before I was with you, actually, Robert, in Seattle, I was in London for the NFL game there, right? So
That's right.
People are taking their sports all around the world. And that globalization effort, I think, can be facilitated by the application of generative AI too. So DFL actually, this is a whole bunch of stuff coming together. They took that tracking data, the event data in their sport, and they said, okay, we know that this is a goal. All right. So we're going to take that data. Generative AI is now going back and saying, okay, taking that goal, let's go back into the archives and the database and understand the context of that goal. And let's create commentary in written form that helps explain that goal. So all we get is goal. We know who did it. Here comes the text commentary. This is, his third goal of the season. This is the team's 14th on the season. Whatnot. Gives you the context. They were producing that in multiple languages, using the vernacular of those languages, and then to spiderweb it out a little further, you did it in different personas, leveraging generative AI. So here is the Italian version of that text commentary. And there is a sports broadcaster straight down the middle view of it, but then here's like a really quippy X-feed Twitter style version of it. My favorite was one that was called Brue. And it was like, it was just like, dude, sick goal. That was like, so it was just a little bit more personality, right? But you're never going to produce text commentary. I mean, the next jump on that is then going to voice, right? Text to voice, and then producing it in all these different languages too. But you're never going to produce commentary in unlimited languages and unlimited personas. That is not economically feasible. But if you can do that, all of a sudden you've made your content way more compelling and germane to different markets and different demographics and different constituents, which I think really helps fuel that globalization effort.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you think any of this is a negative effect on sports, or it seems like everything you said is positive? Because we run into technologies in sports that we think maybe take it a little bit too far. But so that's kind of that question. And then that might play into the next question. Maybe you can put them together. Is do you see Amazon exploring additional technologies that aren't, in mainstream today, but you see it coming in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of that, I always say a lot of what we're talking about is rooted in science, right? It's machine learning, it's, all this engineering and tech. But the magic is in the art applied to the science, right? How do you use this? If we're taking all of this data and making the sport feel a little too heady, a little bit too wonky, right? A little too inaccessible, we're doing it wrong. Right. The whole point is, how do we leverage this data to bring people into the sport? Is there a 101 version? Like if you started, dating somebody and they're really into a specific sport and you want to get like boned up on it, can you get the 101 version of that sport, right? And make you feel smarter? If you're an expert, can you go deeper, right? So how do we create this content in a way that is driving engagement and not off-putting folks, right? And I still think, even from like the coaching side of things, people will say like, oh, I'm getting this. Do I go for it on fourth down? Their metrics are telling me. You're not replacing the coach. You know what's going on in that locker room. You know if he just tweaked his hammy on the last play, right? There is always going to be humans involved in this and exercising judgment and taking in factors that maybe the hardcore science stuff isn't capturing. Do I think it helps? Do I think it moves our sports and our fandom forward? 1,000%, 1,000%. And so you ask, like, what's next? I think data is always going to be a part of this. I think globalization, monetization, those are really big themes. So how do we get around that? Whether that's in just language presentation of sport or I guess I'll say this too. Sometimes I'm a little wary. There can be tech for tech's sake, right? Or like a gimmick or a flair. And I don't really like that stuff. I don't, yes, it's a cool marketing story maybe, but I want sustained value here, right? So when we think about something, there might be some really cool augmented reality or, implementations and things like that. But let's think about the artful application of that. Because, I had somebody argue with me about like taking the Vision Pro into the stadium and watching the game with all these. I'm like, that's not going to happen. You go to a live event because it's communal, it's social, it's haptic, it's visceral, right? Like that's not broken. Could the lines be shorter? Yes, right. But, and maybe we want, some data available to us in unique and different ways. But let's be mindful of where we apply this in a way that's actually additive and not distracting.
I saw a reporter say something about that the Vision Pro was going to like end live sports. Like, who would want to go to a game after seeing this? And I was like, or a sports bar. And I was like, people who want to talk to people? I don't know. I mean, it's just like, come on now.
Yeah. Well, and the argument I have, and look, I could be disproven, right? So, but tickets are not cheap, right? So if you're going to go to a sporting event, are you really going to retreat? Like, you could do that at home. Like, I think that experience for at home might be really powerful, right? Yes. I think, I'm a very proud, we're defending national champion Michigan Wolverine, abysmal year this year, but whatever. I'm still, basking in the glow of last season. I went to that national championship game, and not for 1 second was I thinking about how tech is playing into this experience. I was there with other fans. I'm high-fiving people I don't know. The guy down the road, beer for everybody. This was social. This was passion. This is what unites people, right? And so I think we have to be really, really strong stewards of that, right? The tech enabling, helping, making the game safer, all of that stuff is awesome. But when the tech starts to separate us from that affinity, I think we have to check ourselves.
Yeah. It I love the part of connecting fans to the game and connecting fans to each other. In the work that you do, how challenging is it to connect the work that you do in sports to the work that you do in business? Connecting these stories, drawing these parallels of we do this in sports because it's a way to show what you do with major enterprises. I mean, that's one of the big reasons you do it, right? I mean, obviously protecting players, connecting fans, these are all real reasons to do this.
Yeah.
But a real big reason is that it benefits your business. How difficult is it to kind of draw that line and tell that story?
I don't think it's hard at all. I think
Yeah.
I think there's no more powerful storytelling vehicle than sports, and we use it as a vehicle to tell complicated stories. I will give you an example. The NFL schedule. There are 32 teams playing 272 games over 18 weeks. There are 26,000 different factors that need to be taken into consideration when devising the optimal schedule, which actually yields 1 quadrillion permutations of the NFL schedule. We help them synthesize that, and they come up with their optimal schedule for the year. And we tell that story not because we think there are a lot of schedules to be crafted out in the industry. We tell that story because it is illustrating very powerfully that we can take a lot of really complicated, copious volumes of data and make sense of it. Right. And as a matter of fact, we had a commercial at one point that said, the tagline was, if we can do this for the NFL, imagine what we can do for your business. Right. And that's what we're doing. We're telling these really, heady stories. And I was actually, Robert, I think earlier in the day, before I met you, I was talking to somebody who covered manufacturing, and I was telling him
Mm-hmm.
about the digital athlete portal with the NFL. He's like, but this is totally relevant to manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yes, and healthcare, life sciences, and military, right there. I think, it's incumbent upon us to tell these stories in a way that it's, obvious that there is transcendency to them.
Correct.
But, and so that's part of my job too, is hopefully telling these stories in a way that people want to listen to them and can see the bigger picture here, that this technology is enabling
Yep.
business outcomes. Because at the end of the day, if it's not in furtherance of objectives that matter to that industry and that business, then you have to question why we're doing it.
I think there's a lot of things here that will go and transcend to different industries beyond sports, specifically manufacturing. That's a slower industry to take on innovation. And the specific story of sustainability is a great one to showcase how well it's been really taken in by the NHL and how it could be used for other industries. And lots of the other ones that you talked about are fantastic as well. Mel, what do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly why we started doing this podcast and kind of this, what we call swim lane, is that being able to tell these stories of how this translates to real business value is so important, and to kind of help bridge that, where sports is no longer just about sponsorships, but about real partnerships.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and I love that, because that's really how we look at it, and when we're sitting there working with partners, it is that, how do we push each other? How do we get to this place where we are sort of going into the unknown a little bit, together, but with a real clear set of objectives. I don't want to be known as a tech vendor. I want to be known as an innovation partner to our customers, right? And I feel that's what we have so gratefully with NHL, NFL, PGA Tour, Bundesliga, who am I missing? I mean, NFL, obviously, right? The Seahawks, a lot of great customers that we work with and want to lean in with us and sort of help us push the envelope and let us push theirs a little bit. So it's wonderful. I'm very lucky.
That's so great. Well, it sounds like you have a really fascinating and also super fun job. And we really appreciate you spending this time with us. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us a glimpse into the life behind the scenes and all the great things. And we hope that we can do this again and catch up on what new things are happening.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I
Thank you,
really
Julie.
Wow, that was awesome. She's great.
Oh, it's so fantastic. She has so much to say and so much knowledge that really puts in perspective how well Amazon is really affecting and influencing all parts of these games that we're involved in.
I loved that she said she doesn't want to be a tech vendor. She wants to be an innovation partner and doesn't want to just, what did she say? She said her favorite meeting was when somebody said, I don't want your money, I want your ideas. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And how they make the game better, not how they affect it in a way where innovation is taking over. It's how they bring out the best of the game through innovation. I thought that was fantastic.
Great.
All right. Well, this was a great episode. We had Julie Souza from AWS, Melody Brue, Robert Kramer. Thank you for joining us today. We'll look forward to see everyone, hopefully, on our next Game Time Tech. Have a great day, and thank you very much.
Thanks.